Welcome everyone to Diamond's Edge Live. My name is Greg Diamond, editor of 10 Stock Trader at Stansberry Research. And this week I want to ask the question, have stocks and bonds bottom? We're going to look at various scenarios where they have bottom, where they might not bottom. Okay, we've seen some big moves in the last couple of weeks, a couple of months really. So we're going to look at these various situations, what to look for, how to trade it. And what I want to start with are 5 things to keep in mind over the next 2 weeks, call it, okay? And that's earnings, that's the Federal Reserve, whether or not they're gonna stay, whether or not they're gonna cut rates. I can't imagine they would hike, but what is the Federal Reserve gonna do? Inflation has come down. Does this give the Federal Reserve a little bit more room to cut rates, okay? But obviously they're worried about the trade war. That's the 4th thing. And then the 5th thing is this time cycle inflection point that I've been talking about that happens into the end of April, okay? Excuse me. And what we're gonna look at is some stocks that have already bottomed, okay? We'll look at some indexes that have already bottomed, and then we'll look at, possible scenarios of more volatility heading into the end of April and the beginning of May, okay? Let me share my screen here. And let me just show you something that I highlighted to 10 Stock Trader subscribers yesterday. And this is the New York Stock Exchange Index. Okay, it's just a collection of all the stocks. And basically what I was looking at here is a rare setup. Excuse me, I caught a cold on vacation last week. And all right, so what I had here is a wave 1, 2, and then a 1, 2. And then if we had this breakout, this could be the start of what's called a wave 3 of 3. It's these big moves higher, okay? Big rallies, strong moves, in this case, as an uptrend, all right? Now, what I wanted to see was today or sometime this week, this break above this wave 1 high, okay? Now, obviously that happened. So can we continue with this? Absolutely, all right? The problem is, not the problem, but what I really wanted to see, and I was going to get aggressive if I saw everything have this setup, okay? Let's go to SMH, okay, semiconductors, right? So this is the price action here today. It is not above that wave 1 high. This is that April 9th high, okay? So the NYSE is up here, but semiconductors can't can't rally above that. So that just gave me a little bit of pause. Can this still rally? Absolutely, okay? That is the most bullish scenario where this April 7th, April 8th low, depending on what stocks you look at, mark the low and then re-rally, okay? All right, so if this isn't that, then what are we looking at? So let me go back to the daily chart of this. Again, this is the NYSE index. And you can see here what I've marked, and I'll zoom in here, is wave 1 up, okay? And then this is a complex corrective wave 2. And let's say, just call it, just for purposes of timing, not to get too confusing, around the end of April, possibly the beginning of May. We have, the first week of May is with the Federal Reserve meeting. We have earnings coming out. So it could be late April, early May where we get, okay, this fakes everybody out. We get a drop, but it holds these lows from early April, and then we get to rally. So when I look at semiconductors, and this is something I outlined today to 10 Stock Trader subscribers, what we could see is something like this, all right, where, today maybe tries to break back out again, we get this drift lower, all right, and then, that's when we get this rally, all right. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of the daily picture, but notice how, the semiconductors it still has bottomed, even though we can get more downside, all right. The NYSE, likely because it's leading, okay, makes a higher low, okay, well above these early April highs, and then we rally. We can see the same thing in the VTI, which is similar to the NYSE in the Vanguard total stock market, okay? So again, we had this rally that today it's almost a short double top here. You can see that. All right, I'll zoom in here. You can kind of see, right? Again, can this keep rallying into this wave 3? Absolutely. But if we stall out here, all right, and you can kind of see, so what I mean by a complex ABC correction, So we had this move up, okay, and then let me zoom in on this 30-minute chart. And what's interesting about this is you kind of see, so you get this wave move up, wave one move up, okay, and then it's a series of 3 waves. And you can kind of see them here, 3, and then 3, and then 3, okay? So then if we were to get 3, you can even get a 5-wave move down. But as long as these lows hold, okay, into that late April, early May time frame, that would be a low to get aggressive, in my opinion, with call options and buying ETFs and individual stocks, okay? And then we really break out. That would be the, today's a trap, but then we get another bear. Today's the bull trap, but then next week or, into early May is the bear trap, and that sets up the huge rally, okay? We can see the same thing in the iShares USA Momentum Fund. I highlighted this as well. Excuse me. I like to use this in conjunction with some of the other indices. Excuse me. All right, this has all, from this high in January, February, okay, this has all the characteristics of a sharp, volatile, but ABC corrective move, okay? Now you can see the momentum MTUM broke above these highs, just like the NYSE index did, but VTI didn't, the semiconductors didn't, I'll get into the S&P and the Dow, those didn't, all right? So, and you can kind of see here, all right, if we get this drop over the next week or two, okay, what it'll look like is something like this. A 3-wave move down, maybe we trade right below this low, okay, and then that sparks the move higher. Now, what could cause that? Again, we're looking at those 4 or 5 things that I mentioned at the start. It could be anything. It could be mixed earnings, it could be great earnings, it could be bad earnings, but the Federal Reserve cuts, or the Federal Reserve doesn't cut, but earnings were good, and something happens with the trade war, but inflation actually starts to come in lower. The Federal Reserve is behind the curve yet again, okay, and then stocks take off, all right? So those are some scenarios that, look, the stock market has already bottomed. Now we're just waiting for confirmation of that lower high, or higher low, excuse me, into the breakout. The best case scenario, obviously this breakout today just keeps grinding higher, frustrates bears, and we're off to new all-time highs by, I'll call it August, September. All right, now let me show you the bond market, okay? And this is where things get a little tricky from how I see it, all right? So this is TLT, and you can see we've had this, move down. Even though the Federal Reserve cut interest rates back in September, bonds dropped, inflation or interest rates rallied. We had a rally, okay, and now we're dropping. So one of the things that I highlighted to 10 Stock Trader subscribers is what's the correlation going to be going forward? And I think we've talked about this on the show before. Is it going to be something where bonds drop and stocks rally because there's growth? Housing numbers came out pretty good today. Are bonds just going to be mixed and not necessarily, have one big move one way or the other and then stocks rally? That's possible. The Federal Reserve says we're not doing anything. Bonds take it as a mixed message, but earnings come out, inflation is down, stocks rally. Ideally, if we are in a situation where inflation is coming down and the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates, we get a situation like we had here, and this is back in 2023. Okay, we had this sharp correction, okay, and then stocks and bonds rallied at the same time, okay? So are we going to see that now? So you can see here, I've highlighted this Fibonacci retracement, and I'll try to make this a little bit bigger, it's easier to see. This is the 38.2% Fibonacci retracement off of this swing high from early April, okay? So we had the drop, we had bonds and stocks rally today, but bonds, TLT, really held at this 38.2% Fibonacci retracement level, all right? So then what comes next? Let me delete this, all right? There was a symmetrical move I was tracking, but let's just say that we get this complex correction and a higher low into the end of April, early May with stocks. What would bonds likely do, right? We would probably get something like this, all right, where bonds make a final wave low, again, into late April, early May, whether it's the Fed, whether it's inflation, whatever it might be, okay? And then it's similar to that October, November 2023 situation where bonds and stocks bottom at the same time. Only difference would be, maybe bonds make a new low while we see the NYSE index, momentum, that actually makes that higher low, and then we really just take off. So this would be a situation where we could buy bonds and stocks at the same time. So that's the general overview of what I'm looking at in terms of bonds and stocks. Let me quickly touch on precious metals. Now, for the longest time, I've got a lot of questions on gold and silver and mining stocks. And my biggest thing, as I said, for my strategy, at least from trading options, for most of the time, when something doesn't make sense, I tend to stay away. Now, what we have in gold over the last couple of days looks to be a major top. Okay, so we had this huge rally, okay, and then we had this correction, and then obviously stocks are are correcting higher. So gold really has been a safe haven for uncertainty. Everyone's getting out of bonds or getting out of stocks, so they're piling into gold. Has that ended now? Similar to what we're looking at in stocks, there could be a situation where we look at something like this in gold, okay? Either the top is in, or this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we get one more high. All right, we're likely to see negative divergence develop if we do get that new high in gold on the composite index and the RSI. All right, now this is just a mess because gold's down 2.5%, silver's up over 3%. Okay, so if you're trying to play both of these sides, or you're long both, or you're trying to be short or long one, it's just really messy. I can't remember the last time that I saw gold down 2.5% and silver up 3%. It's very strange. I'm staying away. Now let's look at gold stocks. Okay, similar type situation. Gold stocks are down. Okay, and again, as I mentioned previously, when I look at gold as new all-time highs, what would I expect GDX to be doing? I would expect it to be making new all-time highs. It isn't. Okay, this is back in 2011. Now, this correlation was very strong. This isn't. Obviously, yes, they're still rallying. Okay, silver has not kept pace with gold in terms of making these new all-time highs. Okay, you can see that here, right? Now, it doesn't mean that these can't run higher. I'm not saying that they can't. I'm looking for a situation where they get to where the correlation becomes near 100% again. Okay, so that is something that I wanted to cover because there's always questions on gold and silver, so I wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way. Now, when I see these types of crazy moves happen, it gives me optimism that we're going to have some awesome opportunities in the future. But right now, my main focus is what's happening in the stock and bond market. Okay. Lastly is earnings. We have a lot of important earnings coming up. Actually, Tesla just reported earnings. Let me show you something that I noticed in Tesla. Okay. So Tesla's up today. Okay. Now, I don't know if this is going to be the low or not, but what we see in Tesla often over the last few years, and I'll show you, is that April and May tend to be, when it happens into a low, it tends to mark a significant low, okay? So let's just take April and May, all right? And let's just go back in history. And let's look, okay? Last year, it bottomed on April 22nd, April 23rd, which is exactly 1 year, okay? And then you can see what happened. Now, it wasn't a straight move up, but it did mark a low. Okay, we can go back to 2023, and you can see here in May, August 20 or April 27th, that marked the low, and then we had a huge move up. I believe we traded this, if my memory serves me correctly. I think we had some nice trades there. So let's keep an eye on, again, late April, early May for Tesla. We can go back to 2022. Here you have May. Again, it wasn't a huge rally. Okay, this was in the midst of a bear market, but it did mark a low. We can go back to 2021 and look and see, and here we go, May 19th. Okay, so again, April and May may be proved to be an important inflection point for Tesla. Something to keep in mind. Okay, Caterpillar, one of my favorites. Okay, now look at what happened here today. We had a brief high above this April 9th high, similar to what we saw in the New York Stock Exchange and VTI momentum, okay? But it's failing to break above this 38.2% retracement. What would make the most sense to me? This would make the most sense. This is 1, 2, the big move down in March and April after the tariff headlines. March to 3, today marks to 4. Maybe we get a new low in Cat. Okay, that's fine. They actually report earnings on the 30th. Boom, that marks the low. Now I wouldn't be one to trade before earnings with Caterpillar. Okay, but this would be something where if it does make new lows after earnings, probably want to buy it. All right. Again, I can't give financial advice. It's just something I'm looking at, especially for 10 stock trader subscribers. AMD, one of my favorites. Okay, could make a new high. You know, I think AMD reports on May 2nd. So again, we're into this late April, early May timeframe. Depending on how this whole thing shakes out, you know, this is setting up for a low, and then that goes back to what we were looking at in SMH, where we have this possibility of you know, this drag down lower into late April, early May, and then we rally. Let's look at NVIDIA, and I believe that NVIDIA doesn't report until the end of May. So we could see a situation where some of the other semiconductor stocks look to bottom, rally, and then, you know, obviously a lot will be focused on what happens with NVIDIA, but that could set the stage for you know, significant gains. Maybe, you know, NVIDIA has a temporary pause in the rally, but it could also provide the spark. But let's see how the other stocks trade after earnings, and then we'll worry about NVIDIA. But this looks something like it's starting to form the bottoming process. Same thing with TSM, Taiwan Semiconductors. This reported earnings already. Okay, had a nice bump today. Okay, again, maybe we get this new low or a higher low similar to what we see in SMH, and then we get the rally. Okay, so lastly is transports. This has been an index that has long been forgotten. Okay, you can see here. I'll just go back over the last few years. You know, while most of the other stocks have seen bull and bear markets, you know, after the 2020 low, you know, transports really hasn't done much of anything. Okay, do we see a situation? All right, this has, if we look at late April, early May, I just put May 5th on there, or whatever. Okay, do we get one more new flush out low in the transports, and then we have, you know, sort of a Dow theory setup where, you know, the transports and the Dow both rally, or both bottom and rally, okay, and everything gets back in sync. That's definitely a situation where we can look at. Okay, so bottom line is, we'll watch to see what happens in the bond market and that correlation. Okay, there is a situation depending on how inflation, trade war, and the Federal Reserve all shake out. Okay, but we could be looking at a situation similar to October of 2023, where bonds and stocks bottom together. And even if bonds make a new low, look out for the stock market, especially in some of the leading sectors or the index like New York Stock Exchange, VTI, maybe some semiconductors or tech stocks. Okay, those make higher lows relative to a new low in bonds. That sets the stage for a massive rally. Okay, that's what I have. Let me take some questions. Does it make any sense to sell puts on ETFs? There's a lot of sense in selling puts in ETFs. It's just not something that I do in this service. Okay, Doc Eifrig sells options. Chris Igu and Daily Wealth Trader sells options. I'm not saying that you can't do it. It definitely makes sense because the instrument itself of an option is to your advantage when you sell it, just because of the time decay. Okay. Now, obviously, in this volatile market, you know, you might have to have some thick skin, but taking in that premium and considering that we have, you know, the potential for a low, yeah, especially when we have these, you know, if we have another big down day or whatever it might be, that's a situation where you can take advantage of that. Can you take a look at Hertz, HTZ? Sure. This isn't something that I've ever traded. Obviously, we have a huge jump here, okay? And this obviously has to do with transportation stocks. So this could be a situation where it's starting to lead, okay? Tourism picks back up, or travel picks back up, okay? Whatever it might be. You can see Hertz has been in a long downtrend for quite some time. Is this a fake out? Okay, and it reverts back to the mean, possibly. But you can see here, it just hasn't done much of anything. There's a reason why I really don't trade it. Okay, what would be something to look for is if we, let's say it fills the gap here, okay, and then everything else bottoms like we think it should, the probability suggests it, and then Hertz starts to form a new uptrend. That could be something to look out for. If you are correct and we get new all-time highs around August or September, what would you expect after that? That's a really good question, and based on some of my cycle work, it would basically mean that, well, let's just start from the bottom or from the larger term time frame. Let me go to the S&P 500, okay? And let me just go back 10 years. And what I'm looking at here, okay, and what I said, over the last however many months, okay, that this is part of a longer term bull trend from 2020 low. And this has all the characteristics of a 5-wave move, okay? Like this, 1, 2, 3, whether this is 4 or it's 4 here, okay? And that gets us into wave 5. That would likely, we see some volatility into the fall, most likely, okay? But 2026 is shaping up for what looks like to be a wave 5 high with another steep correction similar to what we saw in 2022. I'm not getting into that now, but that's what I'm expecting. Does the 7% sell rule work? 7% sell rule. I don't know what that means. Maybe you can ask a follow-up. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about there. Do you think the USA will go into recession? No, I do not think the USA will go into recession. I think that we are having a change of guard regarding obviously what's happening with the tariffs. But inflation is coming down. GDP is still strong. We're seeing trillions of dollars coming into the U.S., whether via manufacturing, energy. NVIDIA is going to be building a plant. Hyundai is building a plant. I mean, all different industries. So I do not think that we're in a recession at this time. Do you think Google bottomed yet? Yeah, so this is into what we can look at in terms of options coming up, okay? Or not options, excuse me, earnings, okay? So to me, we again, this didn't break above those early April highs, okay? So how does this shake out into earnings and into the important time factor? Now, this April 7th low is going to be important in terms of how Google trades, okay, relative to the rest of the indices and the other, Mag 7, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, okay? But if it makes this high or low, probably already bottomed. Thoughts on BlackRock? The banks have been very strong. They've been leading, and as long as those were leading, okay. Now BlackRock's a different animal, but this is a Blackstone. Here we go. Wait. BLK. Here we go. So you can see here, this is actually starting to lead. BlackRock is, okay? And from what I can tell, okay, we can see this in many financials and banks as well, this April 7th low holds, even if we get this drop, okay, volatility over the next week or two, okay, to me that looks like a buy signal. Let's just look at XLF while we're at it. And you can see here, this is something that I had back in April and May, or March, excuse me. Now look at what XLF did. It rallied all the way above, resistance, or rallied below or above these prior swing lows, breaking through resistance. Now maybe this is a big fake out, okay? XLF trades back down into 45 level. It's well above that April 7th low. To me, banks are a big buy. That's as simple as that. When will Amazon go back up? Well, when is always the important part, the important question. But if I'm right about what happens, we'll see how earnings trade. Okay, we'll see what happens with the Fed. We'll see what happens with inflation and trade war. Okay, had a nice jump this morning. Maybe it drifts back lower, and then re-rally. Similar. This is a very similar chart to Google. Take a look at Ollie. Ollie's Bargain Outlet. Can't say I've ever traded this either. Technically, it's been an uptrend. Okay. It's been an uptrend. Very volatile stock. You know, you can see just very, very choppy, very big moves up and down. But it's holding above its 200-day moving average. Technically, it's in an uptrend. Can you look at WSO? Watso. So this topped here on November 25th, along with some other stocks, okay? And you can kind of see it had this drop, and now we're trading lower. It's below its 200-day moving average. The problem I see with this stock is that's not keeping pace with the rest of the market. So everything else is up, and this had a big down day today. So that's something that I would be cautious of. However, from the low, it is still within an uptrend. I would just be mindful of this support here within the, let's call it the 450 level. If that starts to break, this stock could be in trouble. In the Elliott wave, what is the difference between the impulse and corrective? That's a great question. And that is the fundamental roadmap of Elliott wave. And the impulse, and the other thing, the very first episode of Diamond's Edge Live, I went over this in detail, just kind of the basics. But you can kind of see here, the impulse is whether it's an uptrend or a downtrend. And these are the big moves you see, okay? These are the big, like, let's take off of this August 5th, 2024 low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the impulse move. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is a corrective move. This is A, B, C, okay? And this is the momentum. You can do it on any stock, any market. That's what's great about Elliott wave, okay? But this is the ABC, okay? So, continuing on, if I'm correct that this is the big ABC that we've seen, we have this new wave 1 up. This is a wave 2, possibly, okay, into the end of April, early May, and that starts your wave 3. That's your next impulse move, okay? So a lot of exciting things coming up. We have a lot of things to track, a lot of catalysts to look at, but I think the market is looking very constructive here. A lot of great opportunities. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.
Great.